accelerating. Don't lose them in the trees.
Holding steady, patching thermal feed now.
Three weeks ago, in the shadowed heart of northern Oregon's Cascade Range, a search and rescue mission stumbled into a mystery that would haunt its participants for the rest of their lives. The helicopter pilot, a grizzled veteran with over a decade of navigating the wild skies, still wakes in the dead of night, his mind replaying the impossible. The two local trackers who joined him, men whose lives were etched into the rugged trails of these mountains, find their voices catching, their hands unsteady, when they try to recount what they saw. It began on a Tuesday morning, under a sky too clear for the unease that would soon grip them, when a 27-year-old hiker, a man known for his skill in the wilderness, failed to return from a solo trek. The hiker had been dropped off at a remote trailhead on Sunday afternoon, his backpack heavy with supplies, a high-end GPS, a satellite phone, dehydrated meals, and a first aid kit. His plan was straightforward: a 2-day hike across a well-mapped section of the Cascades, following established trails to a rendezvous point where he'd call his partner by Monday evening. He was no novice. He'd tackled similar routes before, knew how to read a topo map, and could start a fire in a downpour. But when Tuesday dawned without a word, his partner's worry turned to panic. She contacted the sheriff's office, her voice tight with fear, reporting that he hadn't checked in. The Cascades are a labyrinth of beauty and danger. Their dense forests, woven with fir and cedar, stretch for miles, broken by deep ravines, jagged cliffs, and hidden valleys that can swallow even the most seasoned adventurer. The hiker's route, while known to rangers, wound through terrain notorious for disorienting travelers. Narrow paths snaked alongside sheer drops, and the canopy above was so thick it could obscure a man from sight within steps of the trail. By noon on Tuesday, the sheriff had mobilized a ground search team, a dozen volunteers scouring the forest on foot. They moved methodically, calling the hiker's name, checking for broken branches or scuffed earth. But the terrain was relentless miles of tangled underbrush, rocky outcrops, and streams that carved unpredictable paths through the wilderness. Hours passed with no sign. No discarded gear, no footprints, no trace of the man who'd walked into the forest 2 days before. The ground search was faltering, the vastness of the Cascades mocking their efforts. The sheriff made the call to bring in aerial support, a helicopter to sweep the expansive terrain from above. The pilot, a man in his mid-40s with a weathered face and steady hands, had flown countless missions. He'd plucked injured climbers from cliff faces, spotted lost hunters in blizzards, and guided teams to stranded hikers miles off course. His helicopter was his second home, its controls an extension of his will. But this mission would test him in ways no training could prepare for. Joining him were two trackers, locals whose knowledge of the Cascades rivaled the rangers. They'd grown up hunting these woods, tracking elk and bear, reading signs in the earth, bent grasses, scuffed bark that others would overlook. Their presence was a boon, their eyes sharp and instinct sharper. The helicopter lifted off just past noon, the rotor's thrum echoing over the forest as they climbed into a sky of unbroken blue. Visibility was perfect, the air still, a rare gift for an aerial search. The pilot set a course along the hikers' planned route, flying in tight, overlapping grids to ensure no section of the forest escaped their scrutiny. The trackers' binoculars pressed to their eyes scanned the ground below, searching for the bright flash of modern gear, a neon jacket, an orange tent against the muted greens and browns of the wilderness. For the first hour, they traced the trail, the helicopter dipping and weaving over the undulating terrain. The forest stretched endlessly below, a sea of trees broken only by the occasional glint of a stream or the stark rise of a rocky ridge. They found the hikers' campsite quickly, a small clearing nestled beside a burbling creek, exactly where his itinerary had placed it. From above, It looked untouched. A green tent pitched taut, a backpack leaning against a log, a fire pit cold but neatly arranged. No signs of a struggle, no scattered gear, no evidence of distress. Yet the hiker was nowhere to be seen. The pilot circled the site, dropping lower, the rotowash stirring the treetops. The trackers studied every detail through their lenses, but the dense canopy hid any tracks or signs of departure. The forest around the campsite was a wall of green, undisturbed from their vantage point. They lingered, circling again and again, hoping for a clue, a broken branch, a scrap of fabric, but the site offered nothing but silence. With no leads at the campsite, they widened their search, spiraling outward in ever larger circles. The trackers directed the pilot toward natural landmarks, streams where a thirsty hiker might linger, clearings where an injured man might signal for help, ridges offering a view of the valley. They checked ravines for signs of a fall, open patches for makeshift shelters, and high ground where a lost soul might climb for bearings. The helicopter's shadow danced over the forest, its engine a steady drone as they combed the wilderness. The pilot's hands were steady, but a knot of unease tightened in his chest. Something about this mission felt wrong, though he couldn't name it. The trackers, usually talkative, were quiet, their focus absolute as they peered into the green abyss below. 2 hours into the search. As they flew over a remote stretch of forest where trails faded into uncharted wilderness, one tracker stiffened, his binoculars locked on a patch of trees below. "There," he said, voice low, pointing to a flicker of movement. At first, they thought it was a bear, its bulk shifting through the underbrush. Bears were common here, their heavy forms a familiar sight in these woods. But as the pilot banked for a closer look, dropping the helicopter to just above the canopy, the tracker's face paled. "That's no bear," he muttered. The pilot squinted through the windshield, his heart lurching as he saw it too. The figure below moved on 2 legs, striding through dense thickets with a purpose no animal could mimic. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, its broad shoulders and muscular frame cloaked in dark. Matted fur that blended with the forest shadows. Over its right shoulder hung a limp form. Unmistakably human, dressed in hiking clothes, a red jacket, khaki pants, a backpack dangling loosely. The jacket matched the missing hiker's description perfectly, its bright color a stark contrast to the creature's dark fur. The pilot's breath caught, his hands tightening on the controls. The trackers, their binoculars still raised, exchanged a glance that held both fear and disbelief. This was no known creature, no bear or mountain lion. It moved with a deliberate grace, navigating terrain that would have stopped a human cold thorny brambles, fallen logs, rocky outcrops. Its stride was steady, unhurried, as if the weight of a grown man was nothing. The pilot's first instinct was to grab the radio, to call in their position and alert the ground teams. But the trackers stopped him, their voices urgent. "Follow it," one said, eyes still fixed on the creature. "If he's alive, we need to know where it's taking him." The pilot hesitated, his training screaming to follow protocol, but the tracker's logic was undeniable. If the hiker was still breathing, every second mattered. They needed to know what this thing intended, where it was headed. Swallowing his unease, the pilot adjusted course, keeping the helicopter low and quiet, weaving through gaps in the canopy to maintain visual contact without being detected. For nearly 30 minutes, they tracked the creature from above, its massive form slipping through the forest with eerie precision. It moved with a speed that belied its size, crossing streams and scaling obstacles without breaking stride. The terrain was brutal steep slopes, tangled roots, and dense thickets, but the creature navigated it as if following a memorized path. The pilot marveled at its strength. The hiker's body, complete with a heavy pack, seemed no burden at all. Several times, they nearly lost sight of it in the thick canopy, the creature blending seamlessly into the shadows. But the trackers, their instincts honed by years in these woods, predicted its movements, guiding the pilot to keep it in view. Through their binoculars, the trackers began noticing signs of regular use along the creature's route. Branches were snapped at heights no bear could reach, some as high as 10 feet, the breaks deliberate and precise. The earth was packed hard in places where no trail should exist, suggesting frequent passage. Crude markers, stones stacked in unnatural patterns, sticks arranged in geometric shapes, dotted the path as if guiding the way. This wasn't a random wanderer. The creature knew this land intimately, traveling a route it had used for years. The trackers pointed out other details. Faint scratches on tree trunks, too high and deep for any known predator, and patches of compressed moss that spoke of heavy, repeated footfalls. The creature's path was no accident. It was a well-worn trail, hidden from casual eyes. The creature's destination became clear as it approached a steep canyon wall, its rocky face rising sheer from the forest floor. It slipped into a cave, its entrance shrouded by overhanging vines and scattered boulders, nearly invisible from the ground. From the air, the pilot saw its true scale, a gaping maw, 10 feet high and 15 wide, large enough to swallow the creature's massive frame. He circled the area, the helicopter's shadow flickering over the canyon's barren cliffs. The terrain was unforgiving. No trails led here. No paths wound through the surrounding forest. The cliffs were steep, dotted with sparse shrubs and gnarled trees clinging to cracks in the rock. Ground teams would need specialized climbing gear to even approach. And even then, the cave's hidden entrance would likely elude them. The pilot's mind raced. Protocol demanded he radio their findings and wait for backup, coordinating with the sheriff's teams to plan a safe approach. But the trackers argued fiercely against delay. If the hiker was alive, time was critical. Hours could mean the difference between life and death. The creature's intentions were unknown. Did it see the hiker as prey or something else? The trackers, their faces set with determination, insisted on immediate action. They were armed, experienced with dangerous wildlife, and knew the terrain better than most. But this wasn't a bear or a cougar. It was something beyond their experience, something that didn't belong in any field guide. The debate in the helicopter was tense, voices low but sharp. The pilot's training screamed caution search, and rescue operations relied on clear protocols, not reckless heroics. Attempting a confrontation with an unknown creature in uncharted terrain was madness. But the trackers pressed their case. They'd seen the creature's strength, its speed, and if it meant harm, the hiker might already be lost. A ground team, even with climbing gear, would take hours to reach this remote canyon, and by then, it could be too late. The pilot's hands tightened on the controls, his heart pounding. He knew the trackers were right, but every instinct screamed to stay safe, to follow the book. Yet the thought of the hiker, alone and possibly injured, tipped the scales. They had to act. Finding a landing spot was a challenge. The terrain offered no easy clearings, only dense forest and rocky outcrops. After circling, the pilot spotted a narrow meadow half a mile from the canyon, barely wide enough for the helicopter's rotors. The descent was harrowing, the treetops brushing the blades, the meadow's edges closing in like a vice. He touched down with a jolt, his hands trembling as he ran through the post-landing checks. The trackers grabbed their gear rifles with high-caliber rounds, rope, first aid kits, and radios moving with the efficiency of men who'd spent decades in the wild. But there was a new tension in their movements, a wariness that hadn't been there on routine hunts. They knew they were stepping into the unknown. The pilot wanted to stay with the helicopter per standard procedure. His role was to maintain radio contact with base, keep the aircraft ready for a quick evacuation, and avoid unnecessary risks. But the trackers wouldn't hear it. This wasn't a normal operation, they argued. The creature's size, its apparent cunning, made it a threat unlike any they'd faced. 3 men stood a better chance than 2, especially if it came to a confrontation. The pilot resisted, citing safety protocols, his voice sharp with fear. He'd flown through storms, landed on cliffs, but this was different. The creature wasn't just a physical threat. It was an enigma, its motives unclear. The tracker's urgency won out. They needed him, they said, not just for numbers, but for the hiker's life. Every second spent debating was a second lost. Reluctantly, the pilot agreed, his stomach churning as he disabled the helicopter's engine and hid the keys in a crevice beneath a nearby rock, a location only he knew. The half-mile trek to the canyon was a grueling slog through a forest that seemed to resist their passage. The underbrush was thick, roots snaking across the ground, streams cutting unexpected paths. The trackers took point, their eyes scanning for signs, their rifles held low but ready. Halfway to the canyon, they found the creature's trail, unmistakable in the soft earth. Footprints, nearly 18 inches long, pressed deep into the soil. The impression spoke of immense weight, far beyond any bear or elk. The tracks were humanoid, with distinct toes, but their size defied reason, larger than anything in the scientific record. The trail revealed more than footprints. Branches were snapped at heights of 8 to 10 feet, the breaks deliberate, as if marking a path or claiming territory. Deep scratches marred tree trunks, too high and precise for any known predator. Some were fresh, the wood still pale, while others were weathered, suggesting years of activity. A musky odor hung in the air, sharp and alien, unlike any animal scent the trackers knew. It was organic, intense, a marker of presence that clung to the forest like a warning. The trackers exchanged glances, their faces grim. This wasn't a random encounter. The creature had been here, in this part of the forest, for a long time, its habits ingrained in the landscape. Closer to the canyon, the signs grew more elaborate. Crude structures appeared along the trail stones, stacked in unnatural patterns. Branches woven into primitive shelters or markers. Some seemed designed to guide, others to conceal. The trackers noted their placement, strategic and purposeful, as if the creature had mapped its domain with care. The most chilling discovery came in a small clearing, 100 yards from the cave's entrance. Bones littered the ground. Deer, elk, small mammals picked clean and arranged in neat piles. But among them were fragments that froze the men's blood, scraps of faded fabric, a tattered hiking boot, and what looked like human bones, weathered by years of exposure. The trackers' eyes met, their silence heavy. This wasn't the creature's first human encounter. It had been taking people or finding their remains. For a long time, the cave's entrance loomed ahead, a gaping wound in the canyon wall, 10 feet high and 15 wide, half hidden by vines and scattered boulders. From the ground, it was nearly invisible, its concealment a testament to the creature's cunning. Fresh drag marks scarred the earth, alongside massive footprints, the soil still settling from recent passage. The stench hit them like a wave musk, decay, and something unplaceable that stung their eyes and caught in their throats. From deep within came sounds, scraping like claws on stone. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and slow. And low, guttural vocalizations, almost like a primitive language. The creature was inside, active, its presence a weight in the air. The pilot froze at the entrance, fear rooting him to the spot. His training hadn't prepared him for this. Nothing had. The trackers, rifles ready, moved with cautious precision. They planned a quick scout, one man venturing inside while the other stayed with the pilot. The lead tracker slipped into the cave, his flashlight dimmed to avoid detection, its beam cutting through the darkness. He returned minutes later, his face pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and urgency. He'd found signs of human presence, scattered camping gear, torn clothing, and a small nook barricaded with rocks, like a makeshift holding cell. Most crucially, he'd heard a faint voice, a human voice, calling weakly for help from deeper in the cave. The hiker was alive, but his voice was frail, tinged with pain. The creature's noises grew louder, closer, as if it sensed their intrusion. Its footsteps echoed through the tunnels, a steady, purposeful rhythm that set the men's nerves on edge. They devised a desperate plan, create a distraction to draw the creature to the entrance, allowing one tracker to slip inside and free the hiker. The pilot, despite his terror, agreed to help. He and the second tracker took positions behind rocky outcrops, gripping stones to bang against the canyon wall, their shouts designed to mimic a larger group. The goal was to confuse the creature, make it think it faced a bigger threat than 3 men. The pilot's heart thundered as he prepared, his hands slick with sweat. This was beyond anything he trained for, a violation of every instinct and protocol. The distraction worked too well. The moment they began, a roar erupted from the cave, deep and resonant, unlike any animal they'd ever heard. It was more than sound. It was a force, shaking the air with an intelligence that chilled them. Heavy footsteps thundered closer, the ground trembling beneath their weight. When the creature emerged, it was a nightmare made flesh. 9 feet tall, shoulders 4 feet wide, its body a mass of dark, matted fur over rippling muscle. Its arms were long, nearly reaching its knees, with leathery hands that flexed with restrained power. Its face, though not human, held a terrifying awareness, dark eyes that locked onto them with cold, calculating precision, studying their rifles, their positions, their every move. It didn't charge. Instead, it stood at the cave's mouth, blocking their path, its massive frame filling the entrance. Low growls rumbled from its chest, sounds that seemed almost like words, deliberate and varied in pitch. The standoff stretched on, minutes dragging like hours. The creature's vocalizations, clicks, grunts, and throaty rumbles suggested communication, not just animal noise. When the pilot accidentally kicked a stone, sending it skittering across the ground, the creature turned, its head tilting in curiosity. It gestured toward the sound with one massive hand, as if questioning its source. The hiker's faint cries from within the cave agitated it, but its response wasn't hostile. It made low, soothing sounds, gesturing toward the tunnel, as if trying to explain something. Its behavior was protective, not predatory, defying every assumption they'd made. The trackers watched, rifles steady but unfired. The creature's eyes moved between them, assessing their weapons, their body language, its gaze unnervingly intelligent. When one tracker shifted his rifle, the creature's attention snapped to the movement, its body tensing. This wasn't a mindless beast. It was thinking, planning, evaluating the threat they posed. It stood with arms partially extended, a living barrier between them and the cave, but it didn't advance or threaten. Its breathing was steady, controlled, not the panicked panting of an animal in distress. Everything about it suggested restraint, a calculated response to their presence. The standoff held, tension thick in the air. The creature's vocalizations grew more complex, a series of clicks and grunts that varied in rhythm, almost like a language. At first, they thought it might be calling to others of its kind, but the sounds were directed at them as if it were trying to communicate. When the hiker's voice called again, weaker now, the creature turned, its sound softening, almost parental, as if calming a frightened child. It gestured toward the cave, its movements deliberate, as if explaining the hiker's presence. The pilot, despite his fear, began to notice patterns in its vocalizations, certain sounds tied to specific gestures, others to the hiker's cries. This wasn't aggression. It was protection. But from what? And why? As the creature turned toward another faint cry, the second tracker seized the moment, slipping into a hidden side entrance, a narrow gap between 2 boulders, barely visible. He moved with the stealth of a lifelong hunter, his flashlight dim as he navigated the cave's labyrinthine tunnels, guided by the hiker's weakening voice. The cave was no crude den. Its passages were widened, loose rocks cleared, and natural shelves held preserved food roots, berries, carefully arranged. Polished metal objects, likely taken from lost campers, were positioned to reflect light deeper inside, creating a primitive but effective illumination system. The air was fresh, suggesting hidden ventilation shafts, and the temperature was steady, a perfect shelter from the mountain's harsh weather. Smaller footprints, some child-sized, mingled with the creature's massive tracks, suggesting a group of adults, perhaps young. Sleeping areas were lined with furs and vegetation, neatly arranged. One chamber held stone tools and fire pits, evidence of food preparation. Another was more disturbing, a collection of human artifacts, backpacks, clothing, camping gear organized with care. Some weathered by years, like a museum of lost souls. The tracker's stomach churned as he realized the creature, or its kind, had been collecting these for a long time. Their origins unknown. Following the hiker's voice, the tracker reached a small chamber, barricaded with rocks and debris not to trap, but to protect. The hiker was inside, conscious but in pain, his leg broken, his body covered in cuts and bruises. The wounds were tended with primitive but effective care, cleaned, wrapped in leaves, and showing no signs of infection. A small stream ran nearby, and a pile of berries and roots sat within reach. The hiker's eyes were wide with exhaustion and relief as he whispered his story. He'd fallen into a ravine while taking a photo, his legs snapping, his phone shattered. Unable to climb out, he'd resigned himself to death. But the creature had found him, lifting him gently from the ravine and carrying him here. For 2 days, it had brought him food and water, keeping him alive. It hadn't harmed him but prevented him from leaving, as if guarding him from the forest's dangers. The tracker's mind reeled. The creature wasn't a predator, but a caretaker. Its actions, driven by an intelligence and compassion that defied belief. The bone pile outside, the hiker said, wasn't its work likely remains from other predators or natural deaths, gathered and arranged for reasons unknown. But the hiker's injuries needed more than berries and leaves. It required a hospital, proper care. The tracker knew the rescue had to continue, even if it meant betraying the creature's strange kindness. Carrying the hiker out was a nightmare of stealth and strain. The man couldn't walk, his broken leg useless, so the tracker hoisted him over his shoulder, navigating the tight, twisting tunnels. Every step risked noise, every pause a gamble, as the hiker's pain threatened to betray them with a groan. They hid in crevices when the creature's footsteps echoed nearby, its heavy breathing and low vocalizations filling the darkness. The cave's sophistication became clearer as they moved drainage channels carved into the floor, smoothed walls, and more reflective surfaces guiding faint light. This was no animal's lair. It was a home, built and maintained with care. Halfway out, they triggered a primitive alarm, a pile of loose rocks that clattered when disturbed. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the creature's roar followed, a mix of rage and betrayal that shook the cave. Dust fell from the ceiling, the ground trembling as its footsteps pounded closer. The tracker froze, the hiker's weight heavy on his shoulder, his heart hammering. Outside, the pilot and second tracker heard the commotion, their distraction faltering. The creature was no longer focused on them, but hunting within the cave, its vocalizations now sharp with fury. The pilot, despite his terror, kept up the noise, banging rocks and shouting, giving the tracker a chance to move. The rescue took 30 agonizing minutes, each second stretching into eternity. The tracker got lost briefly, the maze of tunnels disorienting, forcing him to risk more flashlight use. The hiker, racked with pain, stayed silent, his self-control remarkable. Near the side entrance, the creature came dangerously close, its shadow filling the passage, its breathing loud and deliberate as it sniffed the air. They pressed into a crevice, barely breathing as it paused just feet away, examining the path they'd taken. For endless moments, they braced for discovery, the tracker's hand on his rifle, knowing it might be useless against such a creature. But it moved on, satisfied the passage was empty. They emerged into daylight, the other tracker and pilot waiting anxiously. The group hurried the hiker toward the helicopter, half carrying him through the forest tangle. But they hadn't gone far when the creature's roar echoed behind them. It had discovered their deception and was in pursuit, crashing through the underbrush with terrifying speed. It didn't follow their exact path, but flanked them, cutting through the forest with strategic precision, as if hurting them. Its vocalizations mixed rage with sorrow, clicks and grunts carrying an emotional weight that chilled them. The half-mile sprint was brutal, the hikers' pain slowing them, the terrain fighting their every step. The pilot's knowledge of the area, gained from their aerial survey, guided them. But the creature gained ground, its shadow flickering through the trees dotted the meadow. They reached the helicopter as the creature burst into view, its massive form framed by the tree line. It stopped short, roaring a sound of fury and loss, but didn't attack. Its face, clear in the daylight, was a study in contradictions, powerful, terrifying, yet etched with grief. Its eyes, dark and intelligent, fixed on the hiker with a resignation that was almost human. The pilot scrambled into the cockpit, starting the engines in record time, the rotors spinning as the others loaded the hiker aboard. As they lifted off, the creature watched, unmoving, its vocalizations softening into mournful sounds, as if bidding farewell to the man it had protected. The 40-minute flight to the hospital was tense. The hiker conscious but weak, his voice insistent despite his pain. He repeated his story. The creature had saved him, carried him from the ravine, fed and tended him for 2 days. It had never shown hostility, only care, keeping him safe from the forest's predators. Doctors confirmed his injuries. A broken leg, cuts, and bruises were serious but survivable. His wounds clean and his body hydrated, supporting his claims. The creature's care had kept him alive. The official report was deliberately vague, noting the hiker's rescue but omitting the creature. The 3 men swore secrecy, knowing their story would invite disbelief or worse hunters, researchers, or worse, descending on the forest. The pilot kept the footage from the helicopter's camera, its grainy images clear enough to prove the creature's existence, but too dangerous to share. He retired soon after, the encounter a shadow he couldn't escape. The trackers returned to the canyon in the following weeks, finding no trace of the creature. The cave's entrance was sealed with rocks, the trail markers gone, the bone pile scattered. It was as if the creature had vanished, its home abandoned. The hiker recovered, his leg healing after surgery, but he never returned to that part of the forest. He spoke of the creature to close friends, always emphasizing its intelligence and unexpected kindness. The 3 men pilot and trackers formed a quiet bond, meeting often to grapple with what they'd seen. The creature's actions, its care, its grief, challenged their understanding of the wild. Was it alone or part of a hidden population? Had it learned to help humans, or was compassion its nature? Had they done right by taking the hiker, betraying the creature's strange trust? Asterisk. The forest remains wild, its depths uncharted. Hikers and hunters still venture there, most without incident. But whispers persist, strange sounds, fleeting shadows, signs that the wilderness holds secrets. For the 3 men and the hiker, the encounter was a revelation, a glimpse into a world where intelligence and compassion exist in forms science cannot yet name. The hiker, forever grateful, hopes the creature found a new sanctuary, safe from human reach, where its kindness won't be mistaken for menace.